have some interesting and mind-blowing facts for you about psychology. Fact number 1. I cannot guarantee that any of these facts are actually true or accurate. Okay, let's get started. We often overrate the value of available information, especially when making decisions. For instance, a person defending their bad habit would say they know someone who smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day and lived to 100. Most drivers think they are better than average drivers. Phobophobia is the fear of having a phobia. There are more than 400 distinct phobias well recognized by psychologists. Research shows that just thinking about a plan B can make it less likely that you'll achieve plan A. People who speak 2 languages may unconsciously shift their personalities when they switch from one language to the other. No one born blind has ever developed schizophrenia. Hallucinatory voices seem to be shaped by local culture. In the US, the voices are harsh and threatening, while those heard by schizophrenics in Africa and India tend to be more benign and playful. People will go to great and sometimes dangerous lengths to obey authority figures. In his famous obedience experiments, psychologist Stanley Milgram found that people would be willing to deliver a potentially fatal electrical shock to another person when ordered by the experimenters. People with unfortunate initials such as BIG or ASS have significantly lower life expectancy due to psychological stress related to childhood bullying. Research found that kids aged 4 to 6 perform better during boring tasks when dressed as Batman. Lots of people confuse dissociative identity disorder with schizophrenia. They're actually 2 very different disorders. Schizophrenics do not have multiple personalities but are, in general, confused about what is real and what is imagined. There are, however, a few common threads. Both can include hearing voices in their heads and withdrawal from social interaction. Transabled people cut off their own limbs to become disabled. That makes them feel more comfortable in their own body. When explaining behavior, we tend to attribute our own good fortune to internal factors and negative outcomes to external forces. When it comes to other people, however, we typically attribute their actions to internal characteristics. This tendency is known as the actor-observer bias. Our emotions don't affect the way we communicate. In fact, the very opposite is true. The way we communicate has an influence on our mood. Observations show that a caught crab can only crawl out of a bucket when alone. When there are other crabs inside, they start dragging the escapee down. This principle works the same way for humans. When audio of a basic speech sound is combined with video of a person making mouth movements for a different speech sound, people often perceive a sound that is intermediate between the 2. This is called the McGurk effect. About 1 million Japanese men are estimated to be locking themselves in their bedrooms for years, creating social and health problems, a condition called hikikomori. Erotomania is a psychological disorder in which the affected people believe a famous person is in love with them. Savant syndrome is a condition in which someone with significant mental disabilities demonstrates certain abilities far in excess of average. The skills at which savants excel are generally related to memory. This may include rapid calculation, artistic ability, map making, or musical ability. 270 scientists reran 100 studies published in the top psychology journals in 2008. Only half the studies could be replicated successfully. Our memories can be so easily manipulated that in just 3 hours you can be convinced you committed a crime in your teenage years. 1 in 5 American CEOs have clinically significant psychopathic traits. Experiencing new things slow down our internal sense of time. Crying makes you feel better, reduces stress, and may help to keep the body healthy. 82% of people would feel more confident approaching an attractive person if they had their dog with them. Most people trust the words of an eloquent speaker, often failing to notice breaches in logic or even false information. Words of more competent but less convincing people at the same time seem less important. This is the Dr. Fox effect. There's a rare mental disorder where people imagine that they are decomposing, dead, or non-existent. It's called Cotard syndrome, and it's a form of delusional psychosis. The attractiveness of a robot increases with the robot's human likeness. However, when it looks almost like a human, you have illicit feelings of eeriness and revulsion. You've now entered Uncanny Valley. The high place phenomenon is the sudden urge to jump off a high place, such as a bridge. Most people generally suffer from the boiling frog syndrome. When we find ourselves in a nuisance, we prefer to suffer little inconveniences until they drain us to the limit. When you're mind blind, you're incapable of putting yourself into someone else's shoes, and you probably cannot conceptualize, understand, or predict knowledge, thoughts and beliefs, emotions, feelings and desires, behavior, actions, and intentions of another person. People who have a strong sense of guilt are better at understanding other people's thoughts and feelings. Around 6% of people have narcissistic personality disorder. They have a strong sense of self-importance and lack empathy. Living inside of water can make you calmer, happier, and more creative. Paris syndrome is a psychological disorder mainly suffered by Japanese people, caused after realizing Paris isn't what they expected. The more often people have been exposed to a stimulus, the more they like it, even when the stimulus is presented subliminally. This is called the mere exposure effect. Around 80% of human talk in groups is complaining. In groups, people often go along with the majority opinion rather than cause disruption. This phenomenon is known as groupthink and tends to occur more frequently when group members share a great deal in common when the group is under stress or in presence of a charismatic leader. Happiness, anger, sadness, fear, disgust, and surprise are the 6 emotions that are universally expressed. Allochuria is a neurological disorder in which the patient responds to stimuli presented to one side of their body, as if the stimuli had been presented at the opposite side. For example, if hearing is affected, sounds like a voice will be reported as being heard on the opposite side to that on which they occur. The overview effect is the sensation that astronauts feel when they see the Earth as a whole. The experience of seeing Earth from space made them change how they saw their planet and their relationship to it. Sarcasm promotes creativity. Placebos can often offer as much relief as actual treatments. What's more, the placebo effect is getting more powerful over time. As medical technology improves, our faith in medicine becomes stronger. Our attitudes, or how we evaluate different things, including people, ideas, and objects, can be both explicit and implicit. Explicit attitudes are the ones that we form consciously and of which we are fully aware. Implicit attitudes, on the other hand, form and work unconsciously, yet still have a powerful influence on our behavior. In a common form of synesthesia, known as grapheme color synesthesia or color graphemic synesthesia, letters or numbers are perceived as inherently colored. Blind sight is the ability of people who are cortically blind to respond to visual stimuli that they do not consciously see. One patient tested in 2008 was blind across the whole of his visual field and normally walked with a white cane. The researchers took away his cane and loaded a corridor with furniture that might potentially trip him up. They then asked him to make his way to the other side. Despite saying he wasn't able to see, he made it to the other end on his first attempt. People will unknowingly borrow the ideas of others rather than thinking of new ideas. Rather than consciously stealing a song or making up a story out of thin air, the human brain is capable of taking a story, song, or idea and transforming it in the person's mind. It becomes new. This is cryptomnesia. Jamais vu is French for never seen. For example, you know a certain word perfectly well, but suddenly have the feeling that you're seeing it for the first time. The easiest way to create jamais vu is to repeat a word several times. Several times. Several times. You'll feel that it sounds weird and has no sense. 68% of people that own a mobile phone suffer from phantom vibration syndrome, the feeling that one's phone is vibrating when it's not. The Rosenhan experiment was an experiment conducted to determine the validity of psychiatric diagnosis. The experimenters feigned hallucinations to enter psychiatric hospitals, were admitted, and acted normally afterwards. Despite constantly and openly taking extensive notes on the behavior of the staff and other patients, none of the pseudo-patients were identified as imposters by the hospital staff, although many of the other psychiatric patients seemed to be able to correctly identify them as imposters. Rap rage is the anger and frustration felt when you're unable to open packages. Because human senses are adapted for use on the ground, navigating by sensory input alone during flight can be dangerous. Sensory input does not always accurately reflect the movement of the aircraft, causing sensory illusions. These illusions can be extremely dangerous for pilots. When a number of people witness something such as an accident, the more people that are present, the less likely it is that someone will step forward to help. This is known as the bystander effect. The IKEA effect is the tendency for people to place a disproportionately high value on objects that they partially assembled themselves, such as furniture from IKEA, regardless of the quality of the end result. The Soviet Union created a fake mental disorder called sluggish schizophrenia to arrest anyone who criticized the leadership until the 1970s. Boanthropy is a psychological disorder where people think they're cows. The bottom-line of phenomenon occurs when you've just learned about a new word or concept, and suddenly it's everywhere you go. This is not about coincidence. Before you learn a new word, you just never notice it in the whole flow of information. A Messiah complex, also known as the Christ complex or Savior complex, is a state of mind in which an individual holds the belief that they are destined to become a savior. Researchers have found that optimism is a teachable skill and that you can be the one to teach yourself. Memories get distorted over time. The average human has at least one false piece of memory. The type of music you listen to affects the way you perceive the world around you at that moment. This principle is applied constantly in movies by combining a scene with a certain score. When we categorize information about social groups, we tend to exaggerate differences between groups and minimize the differences within groups. This is part of the reason why stereotypes and prejudice exist. People recognize faces of people of their own race more accurately than faces of people of other races. The Mandela effect was named after a common disambiguation that Nelson Mandela died in prison 40 years ago. In fact, he died at home in 2013. Millions of people seem to have the same memories about this fact, and there are many examples of common facts we all remember wrong. Anorexia has the highest mortality rate of any psychological disorder. Between 5% and 20% eventually die from it. Pronoia, the opposite of paranoia, is the delusion that everyone is secretly plotting your success. A calendrical savant is someone who can name the day of the week of a date or vice versa in a few seconds or even a tenth of a second on a limited range of decades or certain millennia. In a Stanford prison experiment, psychologist Philip Zimbardo discovered that participants would take on the rules given to them to such an extreme that the experiment had to be discontinued after just 6 days. Those placed in the roles of prison guards began to abuse their power, while those in the role of the prisoners became anxious and stressed. The Jerusalem syndrome is a group of psychological phenomena triggered by a visit to Jerusalem, Israel. It is not endemic to one single religion or denomination, but has affected Jews, Christians, and Muslims of many different backgrounds. The best known manifestation of this syndrome is when a person who seems previously balanced and devoid of any into psychopathology become psychotic after arriving in Jerusalem. People under the influence of power act as if they had suffered a traumatic brain injury, becoming more impulsive, less risk-aware, and less adept at seeing things from other people's point of view. Researchers are debating on adding internet addiction to the list of mental disorders. The average high school kid today has the same level of anxiety as the average psychiatric patient in the early 1950s. People typically look for things that confirm their existing beliefs and ignore information that contradicts what they already think. This is known as expectation confirmation. It plays a major role in what is known as the confirmation bias, a type of cognitive bias. This tendency to seek confirmation leads us to sometimes avoid information that challenges the way we think about the world. Your brain does more creative work when you're tired. A conditioned response that has been extinguished often returns with no further training after the passage of time. Saying thank you makes people see you as a warmer person. Your decisions are more rational when thought in another language. A study found that fewer than 10% of people say they're not perfectionists in any area of life, so perfectionism is actually a common trait. Romantic love is biochemically indistinguishable from having a severe obsessive-compulsive disorder. The feeling of certainty can be triggered without the need for facts or reasoning, using electric stimulation over a specific part of the brain. The Martha Mitchell effect is the process by which a psychiatrist, psychologist, or other mental health clinician labels the patient's accurate perception of real events as delusional. Mrs. Mitchell was the wife of John Mitchell, Attorney General in the Nixon administration. When she claimed that White House officials were engaged in illegal activities, her claims were attributed to mental illness. Ultimately, however, the fact of the Watergate scandal vindicated her and garnered her the label the Cassandra of Watergate. Most people experience déjà vu about a conversation or a dream. The Cassandra complex occurs when valid warnings or concerns are dismissed or disbelieved. Time anxiety occurs in a person when they are perpetually afraid of being late or of others being late. 3 out of 4 teenage girls feel depressed after looking at a fashion magazine for only 3 minutes. Studies show that trauma victims who don't search for a reason for their misfortune turn out to be the most well-adjusted years later. If you announce your goals to others, you are less likely to succeed because it chemically satisfies the brain, which is a similar reaction to completing your goal. When offered to write with a new pen, 97% of people write their own name. Holding hands with someone you love can alleviate physical pain as well as stress and fear. The percentage of Americans who define themselves as lonely doubled from 20% to 40% since the 1980s. Any friendship that was born in a period between 16 and 28 years of age is more likely to be robust and long-lasting. 1 in 5 people in France has experienced depression, making it the most depressed country in the world. Human behavioral studies suggest that a person who loses their cell phone can experience a panic similar to a near-death experience. When two persons talk to each other and one of them turns their feet slightly away or repeatedly moves one foot in an outward direction, this is a strong sign of disagreement and they want to leave. The Truman Syndrome is a psychological disorder in which patients believe they're living in a reality TV show. People are more honest when physically tired. This is why people confess things during late-night conversations. Stimuli presented near the beginning and end of a list are remembered better than stimuli presented in the middle. And that's all for today. What topic would you like to hear more about? Let me know.